Welcome back. So I've discussed the Eastern teams that are most likely to get above the playoff line next year in Ottawa, Buffalo, Detroit, and discussing the merits of picking any of them. Now I want to discuss the West and talk about Calgary, Nashville, and Vancouver. Now I'm wearing a Flames jersey, kind of giving up the game a bit, but the Flames ended up with one more point than Florida this year. They ended up 38, 27, and 17. That 17, it just stands out. Too many losses in overtime, too many losses in shootouts. So, and I always see this during the regular season where I'll say, man, they're going to regret losing that point. And always fans will say, hey, at least they got a point. At least they got a point. Getting a point instead of two costs the Calgary Flames a playoff spot and may have cost Daryl Sutter his job. If they make the playoffs, is Sutter still there? Who knows, right? There's no way to tell. Then you get to Nashville, 42, 32, and 8. They have the most wins of any team on the board. And the Canucks finished 38, 37, and 7. The Canucks are here because if I don't have the Canucks on this board, well, Canuck fans are going to be like, hey, where's the Canucks? So when we look at record home and away, with Calgary again, there's something that really stands out here. At home, they were 20, 16, and 5. Not great, not awful, not a playoff team. But on the road, they were 18, 11, and 12, meaning that 500, which is wins minus regulation losses, they were 7 games above 500 on the road, 4 games above 500 at home. However, 12 shootout or overtime losses on the road absolutely handicaps this team during the past regular season. Whereas Nashville, 22, 15, and 4 at home, 20, 17, and 4 on the road. Decent records for both. The Canucks, they were awful at home until Talcott took over. They ended up 19, 20, and 2, so one game below NHL 500. On the road, 19, 17, and 5. So they had 19 wins at home, 19 wins on the road. Their home record got much better, but again, it needs to be better this season. Teams need to have not necessarily fear of playing against the Canucks when they come into Vancouver, but I don't know. Something's missing. When teams come into Vancouver, there's no sense that the Canucks have a real advantage there, and there hasn't been for a few years. Then you get into the East and the West side of things. So against the East, Calgary 12, 12, and 8. Not fantastic or ideal. The third column stands out again, but it's not that bad. Again, the West technically doesn't do very well against the East in most cases. Against the West, they were 26, 15, and 9. And for the months of March and April, they were 11, 6, and 4. So it's interesting to note that Calgary down the stretch weren't bad. They weren't awful. They just didn't make the playoffs. On the Nashville front against the East, they're actually above 500, 17, 14, and 1. They don't see what the big deal is about the East. Against the West, they were 25, 18, and 7. Over the months of March and April, 13, 9, and 2. So not a fantastic record over the last couple of months of the season. Not terrible either. And they stayed in the hunt right until the very end there. Then there's Vancouver. They were kind of in the hunt, and really they weren't. But against the East, this is where it stands out. And I know I'm a bit of a broken record on this, but don't be surprised this coming season if, during previews and everything, I'm like, hey, road trip, East Coast, get it right. They were 10, 20, and 2 against the East. So if you want to look for a reason why the Canucks struggle, just look at the record against the East. I would say over the last 3 years, it's been brutal. And then against the West, 28, 17, and 5, they actually have a pretty solid record in comparison with the other two on the board against the West. The months of March and April, they were 14, 6, and 2. That's a bit deceptive, and I do think it's something that people need to keep in mind. The Canucks finished the season strong, but they knew the schedule was weaker. People telegraphed a month in advance when Bruce Boudreau was going to get fired, that it was going to be right after that Eastern swing through Tampa, through Florida, through Carolina, through, you name it. They went through almost every juggernaut you can imagine on that road trip, and it was a brutal road trip. And then Boudreau comes home, they fire him, and he already had his plane ticket because he knew he was getting fired after that game. So, this is what's going to be key. The Canucks have a road trip through the East Coast early in the season, and that could be it, right? They need to be better against the East. And it's weird because normally you don't look and say, well, interconference games made a huge difference. But with Vancouver, they absolutely do. So comparing the starters, and I'm just going to say straight out, Nashville has the advantage there by far. Markstrom's coming off of a down year. I expect him and Vladar to be probably 50-32 in terms of starts. Demko needs to stay healthy. He needs to be 100%, needs to stay healthy and play like he did a couple years ago, not like the season he just had, right? So he finished the season pretty strong, but it was a rough start, and then he was out for a long time with injury. The Canucks cannot afford that. Also, I'm going to throw this in there. Of the three teams on the board, the Canucks are the one that still do not have a defined backup. It could be Silovs. Absolutely, it could be Silovs. I think that would be great if it was. But if they're looking to get above the playoff line, having a situation where if Demko gets hurt, you could have Silovs and Martin as your duo. It's not optimal. Not optimal at all. So we'll see what happens there. But that is an advantage for Nashville. That Saros steals wins, and we'll talk about how that works. The workhorse on the blue line, Rasmus Andersson for Calgary, 24 minutes and 5 seconds, an underrated defenseman. People will agree with me when they see my defenseman rankings. Hey, look, he underrated Anderson. Yossi, 25 minutes and 10 seconds. Roman Yossi is still, for my money, one of the best defensemen in the National Hockey League and is able to drive the game. And I think that coming off of what was still a very good year, I think he's still capable of another 90-point season. And Quinn Hughes, who has, I think, started to become maybe underrated, 25 minutes and 40 seconds per game for Quinn Hughes. He played a lot. So in the offseason, it was clear they needed to get somebody who could play with him, keep up with him, and so we'll see how it goes. Now, with points leaders, this is where things get tricky for Calgary. Calgary's overall numbers are very strong, but Toffoli's gone, 73 points, which means the next points leader from this past season was Lindholm with 64, and there's the debate about whether or not Lindholm's going to stick around either. So while all the numbers on this board tell you Calgary should be the one that jumps into the playoffs, there's some uncertainty there. Hanifin and Lindholm being that uncertainty. It's interesting. They came into town together. Maybe they go out of town together. Yossi was the leading scorer for Nashville with 59 points. So when people talk about Duchesne getting bought out and Johansson being traded, they weren't lighting the world on fire when they played anyways. And 59 points for a team leader, that's got to change this year. Pettersson, 102 points, easily the highest number on the board. And yeah, Pettersson has been absolutely fantastic for the Vancouver Canucks. So bounce back candidates, I went through each team's roster. I think obviously for the Flames, Huberdeau is the bounce back candidate. And with Toffoli gone, Huberdeau kind of has to bounce back, right? He has to go out there. He has to get 30 goals minimum, I would say. Minimum 90 points. Can he do that in Calgary? We shall see. Ryan O'Reilly's the one I put up there for Nashville because why not? Nashville's made these moves. A lot of things have changed. And O'Reilly, I think, is going to be given every opportunity at ice time. And so, yeah, maybe O'Reilly ends up having a bit of a bounce back in Nashville. I know he's a little bit older than a lot of guys who have bounce back years, but guys in their 30s can't have bounce back seasons. And Pearson's one of the unknowns for Vancouver. Is Pearson going to play this year? No idea. But when I was looking through for a bounce back candidate, I figured, why not Pearson? Most of the Vancouver Canucks players kind of had seasons that we would have expected. And the only ones I could find that I was like, well, maybe, are ones more of a breakthrough candidate than anything else. So I figured, why not Pearson? So we get into the special teams numbers. The power plays, the best is Vancouver's at 22.7%. Calgary's at 19.8%. And Nashville, 17.6%. So an anemic attack with Yossi as the highest point producer with 59 points. And the power play suffering as well. The penalty kill is interesting because both Calgary and Nashville, 82.6%. I did a bit of a double take when I saw that. So both teams have a decent penalty kill. Vancouver's 71.6%, and it flirted with being the absolute worst penalty kill in National Hockey League history since they started tracking that stat for a large portion of the season. It is absolutely vital that the Vancouver Canucks fix the penalty kill. Shots for and against per game. So Calgary only allows 27.3 shots per game and very good defensively, and they take 36 shots per game. Shot selection, we can discuss as well, and we will. We'll get into a bit of shot selection talk. But then you look at Nashville, they take 29.5 shots per game. They allow 33.3. For Vancouver, 29.7 shots in their favor per game. They allow 30.8. So the 33.3, that is 6 more shots per game against for Nashville than for Calgary. They're very close because Saros is fantastic and Markstrom had a down year, as did Vladar. So with both Saros and Lankinen playing really, really well, it buoyed the numbers for Nashville. And maybe new general manager Barry Trotz looked at that and said, that's not really sustainable. So we'll see whether or not things stay this way. So expected goals percentage, and we get into the advanced stats part of things, and I think advanced stats can tell us a bit of a story here in combination with everything else. So the best one for expected goals is Calgary at 54.68%. So goals scored during the season they were expected at, meaning they don't hit that number, meaning that reflects on the goaltending and on the defense. Next on the board is Nashville at 47.71%, not great. The Canucks at 46.45%. So the Canucks number, not fantastic either. Yeah, the Nashville logo was bugging me too. Goals against above expected. So these are goals allowed that are expected to be saved in normal circumstances. The Canucks lead there at 12.89. A lot of that's going to be with Spencer Martin. 9.23 for Calgary. So both Vancouver and Calgary with poor numbers with the goals against above expected. But for Nashville, minus 46.01. I mean, this right here, this stat, it feels like should be, circled, underlined. It should have asterisks. And this is where, if you want to make the argument for Saros being the best goalie in the league, that number is going to work somewhat to your favor, although we could get into other goalie numbers and everything. And I've done the top 10 goalies as I feel it in the National Hockey League, that post while we're on vacation. But yeah, that number really stands out, and it's part of the reason why Nashville's where they're at. Again, might be one of those things Barry Trotz looks at and says, that's not sustainable. We can't keep doing this to you, see Saros. Save percentage on unblocked shots. Calgary, 93.03%. Vancouver, 93.05%. That is low. For Nashville, they're high at 94.82%. So again, goaltending is the story. And Saros gets a lot of attention, but full credit to Kevin Lankinen coming in and having an excellent season as the backup. So high danger shots for and against. This is a subjective stat. All of these advanced stats I got from Money Puck as well. So if you want to look up the tables and see where teams are at, Money Puck's great for that. High danger shots for and against. Calgary takes 191. They allow 163. That's an excellent number. Nashville takes 184. They allow 190 this past season. Vancouver takes 144 and allows 187. One of the things that plagued the Canucks this year was their goals scored above expected was really, really high, meaning that it likely comes down this year unless the additions they've made end up making a huge difference. So their free agent additions by team, Jordan Osterley was added by Calgary, depth defenseman, right? They traded Toffoli for Sharangovich. That's a downgrade offensively. No offense to Sharangovich, but Toffoli's the better points producer. It'll be interesting to see with Sharangovich, does he get into the 20-goal range? Can he hit 25 with Calgary with the right line mates? Then you get into Nashville. They added Dennis Gurianov, Ryan O'Reilly, Luke Schenn, Gustav Nyquist as free agents, and they traded Johansson for Galchenyuk, which was just a cap dump. Galchenyuk they didn't re-sign, obviously. So for Nashville, there's been a downgrade down the middle in that they lose Duchesne and they lose Johansson, but they do have some cap flexibility. I said in a video a couple days ago, Barry Trotz has said they're likely not done. So Nashville may add more, but it really is about balancing things with Nashville. And I think the key thing is don't have to rely on, not having to rely, I should say, on Saros every single game. If you can have a situation where Saros faces, say, 25 shots and you get 34, 35 and you win the game, I think Saros is going to be quite happy with that. On the Vancouver side, defense was the key, and so was finding a center. Teddy Bluger occupies a spot in the middle. Ian Cole, Matt Irwin, and Carson Soucy are added. Now, they also bought out Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and I don't know how much better this blue line is going to be. And for trades, there's all kinds of rumors. Right now, there's rumors of everybody being traded from every team to every other team. Anytime that I do like web searches right now, it's just ridiculous. There's so much trade speculation, and there's not a lot going on. And for the Canucks, it really comes down to they need to shed cap. Teams know they need to shed cap, and that makes it difficult to do exactly that. Again, of the three teams on the board, from a cap perspective, Nashville's in a good position to improve. and maybe end up making things better. And again, they have a GM that might be looking at these numbers and saying, hey, we were close, or were we? So one argument you could make with Nashville is, sure, they're close to the playoffs, but just because of their goaltender. And without, well, goaltenders, I have to give Lankinen full credit here, but without that stellar goaltending, they likely would have been lower than Vancouver in the standings, right? That's 46 goals he saved above expected. So that's fantastic. Again, this is goals against above expected, not goals saved above expected. This is a different stat, opposite stat. For Calgary, really good numbers. The goaltending let them down. Nashville, numbers weren't great. Goaltending helps them out. And for Vancouver, again, the numbers were decent after a new coach takes over, but it was an easier schedule after that. A lot of games against your Chicagos, your Arizonas, going through California, which is no longer the nightmare scenario that it used to be for the Vancouver Canucks. So I guess if I had to wager on which one was going to get above the line, and I never gamble, I don't. It's just no way. But I would say that Calgary's probably the likeliest to get above that playoff line. Winnipeg might be vulnerable, right? Minnesota might come down as well. Nashville, it feels like is unlikely to get above that playoff line. But look at this number. UC Saros can do it. If anybody can drag a team into the playoffs by himself, and we can have the Roberto Luongo playoff picture. Back in the 06-07 season, Luongo drags the Canucks to the playoffs. They had no business being there. And so the joke at the time was the Vancouver Canucks playoff team photo, and it's nobody's there, just Luongo on the end. And that's it, just Luongo. But for the Canucks to get into the playoffs, their overall play has got to be better, which I think is why during the summer we have still heard the same refrain from Rick Tocchet that they're going to work on fundamentals, the basics, the fundamentals and basics. And I think they're going to keep doing it until the Canucks get better in that regard, because everything would indicate that the Canucks had an off year, whereas with both Calgary and Nashville, they definitely look like teams that if things go a little bit differently, they could be above the line. So my question to you is, which team do you think ends up above the playoff line out of these three, or none of them? Is your answer none of them? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.